Right back. That is where Declan Rice was standing when England needed him most against Democratic Republic of Congo. Not in midfield. Not in his usual position, the one that made him one of the most talked about midfielders in the Premier League. Right back. England had been struggling. They could not break the African nation down. The game was stuck, the crowd was getting nervous, and the match was slipping into the kind of frustrating deadlock that turns a comfortable World Cup night into a stressful one. Then Thomas Tuchel and his coaching staff made a decision. They moved Declan Rice out wide to right back. And suddenly, England looked like a different team. The final score was 2-1 in England's favour. But the story is not really about the scoreline. The story is about what that positional switch reveals and why it matters so much for Arsenal fans watching from home. Because if Declan Rice can do that on the biggest stage in world football, the question that follows is obvious. Why has Arsenal never fully explored this option themselves? Let me be clear about what was actually at risk here. England were not cruising. They were being held. A team that many expected to dominate Democratic Republic of Congo was instead searching for answers. And if that switch had not worked, if Rice had struggled in an unfamiliar role under World Cup pressure, the consequences could have been serious. A dropped result at this stage of a World Cup does not just hurt pride. It can completely change the shape of a tournament run. On top of that, this comes at a time when Arsenal's defensive options are already stretched. William Saliba has been dealing with a back issue. Jurrien Timber and Ben White have both been unavailable at points this season. When your first-choice centre-backs and full-backs start dropping like that, a manager needs solutions. And normally those solutions have to come from within the existing squad. So the stakes were not just about one football match in the group stages. The stakes were about proving in real time, under real pressure, whether a player built and trained as a defensive midfielder could genuinely function in a back four position when a team needed it most. Now, before I go any further into this story, if you want the kind of analysis that actually looks past the headlines and breaks down what these decisions mean for Arsenal's structure, their transfer business, and their season ahead, this is exactly the channel for that. Hit subscribe if you want the full picture every time something like this happens, because there is a lot more coming in this video that ties directly into Arsenal's summer plans. The Rice experiment. Let's slow this down and go through exactly what happened, because the details matter here. Declan Rice played right back for England against Democratic Republic of Congo. This was confirmed after the match, and it was not simply a tactical afterthought. Thomas Tuchel himself explained afterward that it was actually his assistant, Anthony Barry, who made the call to shift Rice into that role. The thinking behind it was simple. England needed more threat coming from the wide areas, and Rice offered something different out there that the team had been missing. It worked. Rice looked composed. He looked effective. He gave England a spark from a position most people would never have expected him to play. And it was not just neutral observers who noticed. Ezri Konsa, the Aston Villa defender who lined up alongside Rice in that England backline, spoke about it directly afterward on Lion's Den. Konsa's words were telling. He said it felt secure. He said it felt good. He said he believed in Rice out there. He pointed out that Rice had played that role before, that everybody already knew his qualities, and that he personally had no worries about it. He even said he did not have to look over his shoulder, which, if you think about it, is one of the highest compliments one defender can give another. When a teammate says he does not need to check behind him because he trusts the player next to him, that tells you everything about how comfortable and secure that Rice experiment actually looked in practice. Now here is where this gets particularly interesting for Arsenal supporters. Ezri Konsa is not just some player. He is a centre-back who has entered Arsenal's radar as they look at new defensive options this summer. His name has been circulating amid Arsenal's efforts to strengthen at the back, and it just so happens that the same player being linked with a move to Arsenal is the one publicly praising Declan Rice's ability to operate in defence. That is not a coincidence worth ignoring. If Konsa were to actually arrive at Arsenal, you would have a defender who has already played alongside Rice in this exact experimental setup, who has already spoken publicly about trusting him there, and who understands exactly how that partnership functions under pressure. That is not something a club can manufacture. That kind of understanding either exists or it does not, and based on what Konsa has said, it already exists. Let's talk about what this means tactically for Mikel Arteta, because this is the part that I think deserves more attention than it has been getting. Arsenal have had real defensive injury problems this season. When Timber and White were both unavailable, especially during the Champions League period, Arteta did not have this specific option available to him. He did not turn to Rice as an emergency right back the way Tuchel and Barry did with England. And in hindsight, given how well it worked on the international stage, that raises a fair question. Was there a solution sitting inside the Arsenal squad the entire time that simply was not used? I want to be careful here and stick strictly to what we know. There is no confirmation that Arteta will actually deploy Rice this way for Arsenal next season. What we do know is that the concept has now been tested, under pressure, on the biggest stage possible, and it held up. We know a teammate who is specifically now a transfer target for Arsenal has vouched for it publicly. And we know Arsenal's defence has had gaps that a versatile option like this could theoretically fill. There is also a benefit to this idea that goes beyond just plugging a defensive hole. Think about what it would do for Arsenal's midfield balance. If Rice can function at right back in specific matches, that potentially allows Arteta to keep him on the pitch during tight, cagey games, while still finding room for an additional body in midfield elsewhere. That is not just a defensive fix. That is a way of adding tactical flexibility to the entire team shape without needing to bring in a brand new specialist. Now, I want to separate fact from speculation clearly, because that distinction matters. What is confirmed is this. Rice played right back for England. It worked. Tuchel credited Anthony Barry with the decision. Konsa praised the partnership directly. Konsa has been mentioned as an Arsenal transfer target. Those are the facts. What remains uncertain, and this needs to be stated plainly, is whether Arsenal will actually sign Konsa and whether Arteta will actually use Rice in this role during Premier League or Champions League matches next season. Neither of those things has been confirmed. They are possibilities that are now being discussed because of what happened on the pitch against Democratic Republic of Congo, not decisions that have actually been made by the club. Martinelli's transformation. While the Rice story was developing, something else was happening in Brazil's World Cup campaign that Arsenal fans absolutely need to know about. Gabriel Martinelli scored a 96th-minute winner for Brazil, and that goal alone would have been enough to make headlines. But the bigger story is what came after it. Following that dramatic late winner in Brazil's 2-1 victory over Japan, where Martinelli was deployed by Carlo Ancelotti as a number 8 rather than in his usual wide-forward role, reports out of Brazil, specifically from Globo Esporte, indicated that Martinelli was expected to start as an attacking midfielder when Brazil faced Norway. Think about what that means. This is a player Arsenal fans know primarily as a winger, sometimes used as a central striker, but Ancelotti is now trusting him in a genuine attacking midfield role for Brazil at a World Cup. That is a significant show of faith from one of the most experienced coaches in world football. This matters for Arsenal specifically because of one key detail. Mikel Arteta has, up to this point, been firmly against using Martinelli in a more central role at club level. That is worth repeating clearly. At Arsenal, Martinelli has largely been kept wide. At the World Cup, under Ancelotti, he is being tested and trusted centrally, and by all accounts performing well enough to earn another opportunity there against Norway. So now Arsenal fans are watching a version of Martinelli they rarely get to see in the Premier League. A central, creative, goal-scoring version of him, playing between the lines rather than hugging the touchline. And the reaction from supporters has reflected that excitement. Fans have been comparing his potential in this deeper role to some of the most gifted attacking players in the game, drawing parallels between his central influence and the creative output of players like Martin Odegaard, and even suggesting that his all-around contribution rivals what recognised strikers have been producing. There is also historical context here that strengthens the argument. When Martinelli first burst onto the scene in English football, it was actually as a striker under Unai Emery, and he excelled in that role. It was not some experimental gimmick. It worked well enough that his performances earned praise from figures across the football world, including comparisons at the time to being one of the most exciting young talents anywhere in the game. Here is the honest, balanced way to look at this. Right now, this is a World Cup story, not an Arsenal tactical shift. Arteta has not changed his stance. There has been no confirmation that Martinelli's role at Arsenal will change next season. What we do have is clear evidence that a top-level international manager sees value in Martinelli centrally, that Martinelli has previously succeeded in a more central role earlier in his career, and that fans are now openly asking whether Arsenal are underusing one of their most talented attacking players by continuing to restrict him to a wide position. Whether Ancelotti's decision at international level eventually influences Arteta's thinking domestically is something nobody can say for certain right now. But it is absolutely a storyline worth watching closely as Martinelli continues through this World Cup. The transfer market snapshot. Now let's move away from the World Cup performances and into what is happening across the transfer market, because there has been a wave of separate stories, each one carrying its own weight, and each one needs to be treated with its own level of certainty or uncertainty. The first update concerns a young Brazilian forward wearing the number 26 shirt, a player who has caught the eye of Arsenal, Paris Saint-Germain, and Manchester United. This player was signed by Bournemouth for a record fee of €37 million earlier this year. Despite the interest from three major clubs, Bournemouth are described as determined to keep him for another season. My read on this one is simple. This is very much an early-stage situation. Interest from three major European clubs tells you the player has serious quality, and a €37 million fee already shows Bournemouth do not view him as a squad filler. But when a selling club is described as determined to keep hold of a player, that is usually a strong signal that any deal, if it happens at all, is a long way from being finalised. Arsenal fans should file this one under long-term interest rather than anything close to imminent. The second story is a genuinely emotional one for anyone who supports Arsenal. Santi Cazorla has confirmed that he wants to return to the club, and this comes shortly after he announced his retirement from playing football altogether. Cazorla described Arsenal as his home, and he has repeatedly expressed a desire to take up a coaching role there. He also revealed that he has already held direct talks with Mikel Arteta about the possibility of returning to North London. What stands out to me here is the word repeatedly. This is not a one-off comment made in an emotional moment right after hanging up his boots. Cazorla has consistently expressed this desire, and the fact that talks with Arteta have already taken place tells you this is being treated seriously behind the scenes, not just as a nice gesture from a beloved former player. That said, and this needs to be stated honestly, no coaching role has actually been confirmed yet. This remains a genuine possibility rather than a done deal, and Arsenal supporters should enjoy the sentiment of it while understanding that nothing formal has been agreed. The third story concerns Arsenal's goalkeeping situation. The club are considering Jan Sommer as an experienced, low-cost backup option to David Raya. Sommer is available on a free transfer after his contract at Inter expired. At the same time, Kepa Arrizabalaga reportedly wants to leave, with interest coming from clubs in Italy. However, and this is an important detail, Club Brugge are currently leading the race for Sommer, with Ajax also showing interest. Arsenal's broader shortlist for this backup goalkeeper role also includes Matthew Ryan, Ilan Meslier, and Stefan Ortega. This is a story where precision really matters. Arsenal are not confirmed to be signing Sommer. They are considering him, alongside at least three other names. And on top of that, two other clubs are currently ahead of Arsenal in the race for his signature. If you strip away the noise, what you actually have is a club identifying a need for experienced cover between the posts, exploring several free or low-cost options, while keeper's future away from Arsenal looks increasingly likely given his own stated desire to leave. The fourth story involves a young player named Ayoud Bouadi, who is described as highly admired at Arsenal and remains a genuine target for the club this summer. However, the framing here is crucial. Bruno Guimarães remains the clear top priority in midfield, with a new offer of around £60 million expected to be submitted in the coming week. Any move for Bouadi will not progress until after the World Cup concludes. This tells you everything about Arsenal's priority list this summer. Bouadi is admired, he is on the radar, but he is not the priority. Bruno Guimarães is. The size of that expected offer, £60 million, shows the level of seriousness Arsenal are putting into that specific pursuit, and it directly explains why any interest in Bouadi has effectively been paused until the World Cup is finished. The fifth story adds another layer to the Bruno Guimarães situation, and it comes from a different angle. Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich have been named as clubs interested in signing Martin Odegaard this summer. When you place that next to the Bruno Guimarães pursuit, an interesting picture starts to form. Arsenal are trying to bring a top central midfielder in, while simultaneously facing outside interest in their own captain and creative focal point. Again, staying strictly with what is confirmed, this is described as interest, not an active negotiation or a bid. But it is worth Arsenal supporters keeping an eye on, especially given how much creative responsibility currently runs through Odegaard in this Arsenal team. The sixth and final transfer update ties directly back into the Bruno Guimarães pursuit and gives us the clearest picture yet of how serious Arsenal actually are. Arsenal have set the price they are willing to pay for Newcastle's Bruno Guimarães, and their offer is described as potentially enough to tip the balance in their favour. When you combine this with the earlier report of a £60 million offer expected next week, it becomes clear that this is not a speculative wait-and-see approach from Arsenal. This is an active, calculated pursuit with a defined financial ceiling that the club believes gives them a genuine chance of success. The Nico Williams situation. Let's move to a completely separate transfer story now, one involving a different type of attacking option altogether. Arsenal are reported to be ready to move for Athletic Bilbao's Nico Williams, with a fee in the region of €90 million being mentioned for the Spanish winger. Let's establish the facts clearly before analysing anything. Williams had a productive season at Athletic Bilbao, scoring 6 goals and providing 7 assists across 32 matches in all competitions last season. He is 23 years old, which places him firmly in what most would consider the entry point of a player's peak years. His primary position is left winger, though he is also capable of playing on the right side when required. His current contract at Athletic Bilbao is reported to run until the summer of 2035, which is an extremely long-term deal. Now here is where I want to bring some analytical honesty into this, because a long contract like that changes the entire complexion of a potential transfer. When a player still has close to a decade left on his existing deal, the selling club holds almost all of the leverage. There is no pressure on Athletic Bilbao to sell early, no expiring contract creating urgency, and no risk of losing him for a reduced fee down the line. That is very likely why the reported valuation sits at €90 million, a figure that reflects both his ability and the total lack of financial pressure on the selling club. From a pure footballing perspective, Williams offers exactly the kind of profile that top-level attacks are built around in the modern game. He is a strong dribbler capable of driving forward from wide areas. He has the vision to create clear chances for teammates in the final third, and he also carries a genuine long-range shooting threat. His versatility, being able to operate effectively on either flank, would give any manager tactical flexibility in how an attack is set up from game to game. The obvious follow-up question for Arsenal fans is how well this kind of profile would translate to the physical and tactical demands of the Premier League. That remains unproven, since his career so far has been built entirely within Spanish football, and adapting to a new league, a new physical intensity, and a new football culture is never guaranteed, no matter how talented a player is. Taking a step back to look at Williams within the broader context of everything else happening around Arsenal this summer, this move would represent something different from the central midfield business being pursued through Bruno Guimarães, and different again from the goalkeeping and defensive business being explored through Jan Sommer and Ezri Konsa. Williams represents attacking reinforcement, specifically more pace, more direct running, and more firepower feeding into Arsenal's front line. If you consider the club's overall summer approach based purely on what has been reported, a picture starts to emerge of a squad being strengthened across multiple different areas simultaneously. Defensive depth being addressed through interest in Konsa, goalkeeping cover being addressed through interest in Sommer and others, central midfield being addressed aggressively through the Bruno Guimarães pursuit, and now, potentially, attacking width and firepower being addressed through interest in Nico Williams. That is a lot of activity being reported across very different areas of the pitch, and it suggests a club trying to build genuine depth and quality across the entire squad, rather than focusing on just one position. Of course, the important caveat remains. A €90 million valuation for a player with a contract running until 2035 is a significant financial commitment. And until an actual bid is confirmed as accepted, this remains firmly in rumour territory, no matter how strong the reported interest is. So here is where everything stands, based purely on what we actually know right now. Declan Rice has proven, under real World Cup pressure, that he can function at right back, and a potential Arsenal transfer target in Ezri Konsa has personally vouched for how secure that partnership felt. Gabriel Martinelli is being trusted centrally by Carlo Ancelotti at international level, reigniting the conversation about whether Arsenal are underusing him in a wide role. On the transfer front, Arsenal appear to be working across almost every area of the pitch, from goalkeeping depth to central defence to central midfield through a serious pursuit of Bruno Guimarães to attacking reinforcement through interest in Nico Williams. And away from the pitch entirely, Santi Cazorla has opened the door to an emotional homecoming in a coaching capacity, with talks already having taken place. None of these stories are complete yet. Some are close to happening, some are little more than early-stage interest, and it is important for any serious Arsenal supporter to understand the difference between the two. What is confirmed should be treated as fact. What is described as interest, admiration, or consideration should be treated exactly as that, and nothing more. If you want this kind of clear, fact-based breakdown every single time an Arsenal story develops, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because there is a lot more of this summer still to come.